Hey everyone, welcome back. And we're witnessing a common sense revival in this country. If you follow my content across all my platforms, you may have noticed me recently saying that we're experiencing a revival of common sense. For a while now, inversion and other well-crafted psychological tricks have been used by the dark to debunk common sense, or invert the truth with what I have termed as cognitive dissonance-inspiring rhetoric.
As we all know, that our U.S. tax system is a voluntary tax system, and we depend on people willing every year to sit down, fill out that form, and pay their appropriate amount of taxes. So I really think enforcement is a reward to those who voluntarily comply. And I think if the public does not see that the IRS is enforcing the laws, we're going to be at risk of losing people continuing to voluntarily comply.
For the past 2 decades, common sense has been targeted and generally wiped from the cerebrums of our forthcoming generations, and nonsense has been shoved down the frontal lobes of common sense America against our collective will. The elimination of common sense is essentially the tactic used by the dark to promote crazy-making behavior and to develop the crazies and the behavior we've been forced to accept, along with the crazy concepts, the crazy reasons, and the crazy justifications. Or the cognitive dissonance-inspired rhetoric we've been asked to swallow since this all started back with political correctness and affirmative action in the early 90s. But common sense is experiencing a rebirth in this country, which you heard me mention would be the case when Pluto moved into Aquarius in this clip back in 2020.
Take unity and you make it law in Aquarius, and that which makes sense is allowed to make sense. And now, unity becomes the law. Now truth becomes the law. Now transparency becomes the law. And so this is what's happening. So people who make sense will no longer be pariahs. People who make sense will actually have whatever sense it is they're trying to make manifest in reality. People who make sense will sort of have the wind at their backs now, where it was sort of in their faces.
Wherein I stated those who make sense will be allowed to make sense, or in this case, common sense. And as such, as we evaluate and speculate the moves being made by Team Trump and the White Hats, it might be best to view these moves and counter-moves through the lens of common sense. This is another reason we had to heal as individuals and as a nation. If our trauma blocks our reason, our ability to access common sense is overshadowed by our diseased thinking. Heal first to overcome the agreeableness you heard me mention in my book that we all suffer from while under the spell of the trauma-based matrix. As individuals, we must stop being so agreeable to bullshit so that our society can get over their agreeableness to lies collectively. So what does common sense dictate should be the first question we all ask ourselves as we observe the moves and counter-moves taking place in the narrative. For instance, wouldn't common sense dictate that if we truly want to live as free men and women, that we first must learn to think and act like free men and women? It's a sad truth, but we've all been enslaved for a while now, and as such, have unconsciously adopted an enslaved mindset. Some more than others, but we all have slave programs running inside of us that we need to get rid of. Which is why you hear me say this movement is about personal accountability and responsibility, which is another way of saying we need to overcome our collective slave mentality. Common sense is how free men and women think, and if you're still thinking like a slave in a free society, things won't go well for you. As such, a free thinking or common sense mindset is the foundation from which all other thinking must derive, which is to say, I'm responsible for making my world the way I want it to be is common sense. And that's how a free man or woman sees the world. Or, if planes are falling out of the sky, wouldn't it make common sense to look into whose job it is to make sure planes don't do that? So the narrative coming out of the Trump office is common sense dictates. So would common sense also dictate that to be free, we first must get our foot in the door of the institutions that were created to keep us unfree, or show through the process that's been established to create validation in the minds of the American people, i.e., Senate hearings, the mainstream media, and politics, just how corrupt the institutions have become. We can't just abolish politics and government without informed consent. So the uninformed have to be informed, so they can then consent to what makes common sense. Which is why, again, we must heal. We ourselves have to make sense. And this is the sad part about trauma, because until one has healed, one does not make sense, nor does one's thinking. And so, the uninformed have to start making sense themselves, so that they know common sense when they see it. And so, showing them through the very systems themselves that were created to make nonsense is a common sense way to make the uninformed, who are well versed in nonsense, more available to common sense. And in so doing, they can be made aware that there's a problem in the first place. In order to establish common law, we must first reestablish common sense and a society of common sense. You can't have common law without common sense. And remember, the term conspiracy theorist was coined by the CIA to go to war with common sense and to discredit anyone questioning the official narrative of JFK's assassination going back to 1963. And in so doing, they could discredit the skeptics, they could control the narrative, and they could create an ongoing environment of psychological warfare, where the label conspiracy theorist could be used to dismiss any questioning of the government, thus putting the kibosh on common sense forever. And so the fact that I hear clearly from the incoming administration that the way forward will be punctuated by common sense is nothing short of a miracle. And again, this is why we must heal. Because if we're still too wounded, our common sense can be overshadowed by our unhealed trauma. Hence the famous quote, "Heal so you can hear what's actually being said," or common sense, without the filter of your wounds getting in the way. Anyway, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next time.